Hi, let's continue. If you're lost or new here, you can go to the table of contents. The introduction video for this section on what causes bipolar has shown you these five basic pillars of what causes bipolar as we currently understand it. If you haven't seen that, you can go to that one. In this video, we're going to be looking at metabolism, the way cells convert fuels like sugar, glucose, and fats in our diet into the kind of energy that cells can use in a particular part of the cell called the mitochondria, because it appears that there's something different about that in people with bipolar. Here's a very recent article that I'm going to try to translate into plain English, not oversimplified, I hope, but just so that anyone can see how far along this research has come. So I'm going to take this article apart using the diagrams from within it from this key research group. Starting with the journal, this is a very prominent journal, so publishing here is a big deal. It's by a big deal team, kind of one of the main teams working on what causes bipolar, led by Dr. Mary Phillips. It's about mitochondria, the so-called powerhouse of the cells, the place in cells, including neurons, where fuel like glucose or fat from our diet is converted into the energy that a cell can use. We're looking at dysfunction or the differences when people are having manic symptoms. And we're looking ultimately at the neurotransmitters, the chemical signals between cells, and the particular neurotransmitters that are associated with this change in mitochondrial function. In the network of cells, not just one particular brain region, but brain regions in communication with one another that are associated with having manic symptoms. Because one of the reasons to be here looking at this stuff is because there's a treatment that emerges from understanding all of this stuff, this ketogenic diet. So I'm going to show the pathways that this research group has defined. Not here for the details, just to see the big picture of these pathways, these chemical pathways. I want you to focus on the arrows, the big arrows, and the curvy arrows, not the little text, so that you can see the patterns here. So for example, right in this set of steps, metabolic steps, you can see that there are loops, right? It goes around in a circle. So once you start, you're going around in a circle through the big downward arrows and around the curvy arrows and back to the top and back again. So the net result of this loop to loop is an increase in the neurotransmitter dopamine. And all you have to do to get the loop started is to push some extra dopamine into this system. So it kind of starts with increased dopamine and leads to yet more increased dopamine. If you can think of dopamine, it's like the gas pedal for bipolar manic symptoms. And once you push down on it in this loop, it tends to amplify itself. The brake in this system is GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, GABA. It's a common inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. And in this case, it is part of the braking system on this loop, but it is decreased by this increase in dopamine. So dopamine decreases its own braking system under some circumstances, particularly bipolar circumstances. Bipolar brains do this. So anything that increases dopamine could start the loop, including, as Dr. Phillips has shown in her other work about reward sensitivity, the heightened expectation of reward. Latching on to the expectation that something good will happen can pump dopamine into this system and start the whole loop, including inhibiting the brake. So in this metabolic mechanism of what causes bipolar disorder, here's the thinking is that mitochondrial dysfunction, changes in the way the mitochondria work, driven by that excess dopamine, lead to the manic symptoms, which can then amplify themselves. And the reason we're here to look at this is because there's a way to affect this with a diet, the ketogenic diet. So now we're going to shift gears and look at that set of chemistry, again, just looking at the big picture, not the detail. So in simple terms, ketones, a particular chemical that your body can make under some circumstances, increase those GABA effects and act as a brake on this loop. How does your body make ketones? By using a diet, by ingesting a diet that is high in protein and fat and very, very low in carbohydrates, particularly the easily accessible carbohydrates like glucose, sugar, and the things that we eat. Now, it was only a small study in bipolar depression, but there was an 18-point drop in bipolar depression scores in people who were consuming this ketogenic diet. That is huge. So, for example, let's just compare. This is on the same scale, the drop in those same in that same measure of depression in people with bipolar depression induced with lurasidone, one of the leading treatments for the treatment of bipolar depression, or at least leading according to the pharmaceutical company that makes it. But that study this was amongst highly select patients, this ketogenic diet study, a very small sample. So it's just the beginning of research in this area. Certainly makes us think, though, doesn't it? Very exciting. And there have also been cases of bipolar mania treated also with this ketogenic diet. This is more at the level of case reports. And so this whole territory is under very active study and a very exciting area of research. So breathing, again, we have just one more section to go through because I want you to see how the ketones get in there and can interfere with this mania generation cycle. So, and the reason we're here is because we want to shed light not so much on treatment. I'm not inviting you to pursue the ketogenic diet, but in understanding what the mechanism is and the fact that the ketogenic diet works. We're here to see that it sheds light on the fundamental key ingredients in what causes bipolar. So that dopamine drive, which can exhaust and damage mitochondria, leads to another self-worsening cycle shown here in gray. And that is that the more push the dopamine exerts, the more the mitochondria become exhausted and damaged, and that just worsens the process. So that loop, that gray loop, is made worse by a class of proteins called HDACs. And we don't need to know exactly what those are for now, because ketones inhibit that HDAC worsening. They protect the mitochondria from this additional loop of worsening that dopamine can induce. There's more about this, particularly about the ketogenic diet and how it's used in the treatment of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia as well at metabolic-psychiatry.com, which is a whole department of a whole wing in psychiatry now at Stanford, led by Dr. Shabani Sethi, a wonderful researcher who's been part of my learning in all of this. So in summary, ketones get into this loop of that dopamine induces in two different ways: by restoring some of that GABA braking on the system and by interfering with the HDAC acceleration of the loop. Thanks for watching. From here, you can go back to the What Causes Bipolar playlist or to the table of contents.